There's a wave across the land. We are moving, moving. It takes one step, it takes your voice, saying, I am not hearing if you are not naming it. I am not stopping if you are not changing it. Here are my hands, let's see what they're making. In the morning, in the rise up, there's a bridge from all that's been in the dawning. The vines are pushing through the pavement. We were born of burning hearts. We are tearing off the reins. From the ground up we will build it. From the clouds above we'll rain it. From the crowd up we will raise it. From the ground up.
I'm Nisha Moodley, and this is Devotion, the podcast about showing up in new ways to weave a new world together. Hello, loves. Welcome back to Devotion, episode 3. So happy to be here with you today, and gonna do a little solo episode today. I'm not sure how I feel about monologuing yet. It's definitely not my usual preferred way, but there are also things that I want to talk about and share, and sometimes the interview format isn't the best way for me to get these things across. So let me know. I would love to hear from you, what's resonating for you, if you are resonating with the solo episode format, if you prefer interviews. I just love to hear what you're enjoying. So you can pop over to Instagram at Nisha Moodley. Drop me a comment under any of the posts there and let me know what you're thinking. Thank you. So I want to talk today about showing up in our lives, in our work, in our world, amidst grief and heartbreak and intensity. And this has been an ongoing exploration for me for several years, and certainly something that has come up a lot with my clients as well as I've worked with these folks, because we're human and life brings us curveballs, throws us curveballs, and things happen. And things happen in our private lives and things happen in the world that can bring up so much for us. And so this question of how do we show up when we are processing and moving through and dealing with so much emotionally. And I think of myself as a pretty deeply feeling person. I'm sure I've always been that way, although I, as a kid, got called happy-go-lucky a lot. I was a pretty buoyant kid. I don't know that I showed the world my emotions much. My parents would know better than I do because I don't really remember. But I do remember being called happy-go-lucky. And I remember that being a good thing, that I could put a smile on and show the world what a happy kid looks like. And so for me, this process of being with grief and learning how to be with grief and feel my heartbreak and be with the intensity has been a journey of unpacking a lot of that performative happiness. And, of course, I learned that, not that anyone necessarily taught me that, but I adapted to have that kind of performative happiness as a child as an understandable coping mechanism, and so it's something that I've had to unlearn to a degree that I'm still unlearning, I'm sure, and allow myself to connect with the deeper parts of me. And I think that we often culturally look at people who present as very buoyant and very happy and very kind of up and energetic and joyful as really resilient people. And I think sometimes that can be true. And sometimes, especially when it is performative, I think what's often underneath that is a real fragility and an inability to be with those deeper, darker, more challenging. And I only say challenging because in a cultural context where we put grief and anger and sadness on the spectrum as bad and happiness and joy as good. So when we have difficulty being with these more quote unquote difficult emotions, I think it really reveals a sort of fragility inside of us and also inside of our overculture, frankly. So, I think that there are the things that we think of as very obvious reasons to be in grief. Divorce or separation, death, obviously, especially the death of people that are close to us. I also think there are some perhaps not so obvious things that can have us feeling grief or heartbreak or being in a state of intensity or overwhelm. And, things like watching the much needed, perhaps, destabilization of the status quo in our world. Eco-anxiety is a real thing, but I think often grief can come with that. Heartbreak can come with that. Relationships, intimate relationships, it goes on and on. I think it's important for us to recognize that there aren't things that are valid of feeling grief over and things that are invalid. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit because I think it's really important for us to take in, especially in an overculture that that certainly has those rules, that it's okay to be in grief if your child died, but it's not okay to be in grief over a beached whale. And I think that human beings are so much more complex than these really shallow rules. So before we dive in, I want to say that I don't come to this exploration or this conversation as a psychotherapist or a trauma therapist or any kind of therapist for that matter, or an expert on grief, whatever that would mean. I come to this as a human. I come to this as a space holder for many people who have walked through and are walking through their own heartbreak and their own grief. So please receive my words as such, and also know that this is not prescriptive or remotely complete. There is so much nuance that is available and necessary for each of us individually. But I want to share with you what I have learned over the years and what supported me and so many of my clients. And please feel free to come and find me on Instagram at Nisha Moodley and share your reflections if there are other things that you have done or are doing in your own walk with heartbreak and grief and how to show up with all of it. So the first thing that I find really valuable is just naming it. Actually saying, I am sad, or I am grieving, or I am feeling overwhelmed right now. There's something about naming it that can create a space, an opening to not just be in the grips of it, though we may well be, but also to take a pause and acknowledge its presence. And when I say name it, it could be to other people. It can also just be for ourselves to name and claim that this is something that we are feeling at this time. And also, I think it's important for us to know that every heartbreak, every moment or period in our lives of intensity or grief is such a different path. And I think it has a lot to do with the relationship or the process or, exactly what it is that we are grieving and being with. And also with ourselves, with our own histories of trauma, with our own support systems and what's available to us, and also how much we are having to hold while we're moving through the process. I mean, there are so many variables that I could never speak to all of them, but knowing that every journey is going to be so distinctly different because we are all different and our life experiences are all so different can be really supportive, I find. And, I think of two real moments of profound heartbreak in my life. And one was a breakup that I went through several years ago. And the way that he broke up with me, I would not wish on anyone. I understand now that it was just the best that he could do at the time, but it involved letting me know right as I was walking out the door for a trip. So there was no turning back. There was no ability to have a conversation. And actually, I should say that even though I wouldn't wish it on anyone, I don't know that things would have been better even if there was more time and space. I suspect that it might have been a smoother process for me, but it is what it is. And it was really shocking. It was really shocking. And there was no soft landing for me immediately because, as I said, I was literally getting on a bus, walking out the door, getting on a bus. And that was it. And driving away. And it was kind of like, okay, this is over and I'm out the door. Versus when my father died in November, it was a really long journey. It was 2 years that he was actively dying, meaning about 2 years prior, doctors gave him a couple months and then he just kept going. And I had an opportunity in that time to do a lot of grieving, knowing that the chance of him watching my kid grow up was pretty slim. And I didn't say everything that I ever wanted to say while he was alive, including in that window of time that I had. I think I just had so much fear around him that was really hard to shake. I said a lot of it in the last few days, though, of his life when he basically couldn't talk back. And that was really powerful and really cathartic. And I think that because I was able to say those things in that space that felt so truly safe for me, and also because I went through the whole journey with him, I was there at the hospital bedside for the last few days of his life. I slept beside him. He would lay there while I hung out and played card games and talked with family and friends and talked to him, listened to music, all the things. And they were such different journeys, two big heartbreaks in my life, but two such incredibly different journeys. And so again, I really feel like it's important for us to remember that every heartbreak is different. And the heartbreak that we feel over the loss of one pet may be very different than the next. And I also think that shock adds an element for us that really it can take some time and space to process what just happened. So when I went through that big breakup that I mentioned, I ended up at one point going to a girlfriend's house, my friend Liana Silver, and just curling up on her couch, on her bed, actually. And she just took care of me. I wept in her arms. She fed me. I was in such a state of shock that it was really hard to take care of myself. It was super hard to process. And So, a lot of grace. I feel like giving ourselves so much grace for whatever it is that we're going through, and understanding that it's going to be a journey, and that at the outset, we don't necessarily know what the journey is going to hold. I mean, I would say that we never know what the journey is going to hold, but allowing that to be true, and allowing it to be true that this is going to be its own thing, its own journey, its own path that isn't prescriptive, that isn't linear inherently, and that we may not be able to predict, actually. Also, knowing that if we're judging our grief, it's not because there's something, or our heartbreak, it's not because there's something wrong with us. It's because there's something wrong with dominant culture. And so often I hear people say things like, I shouldn't feel X, or, well, I'm okay because this is good. This should be happening. It's really hard, but it should be happening. And, well, that person was a jerk. So, I'm just going to get over it. And all of those things, though they may feel really deeply true, and I'm not saying, well, that person isn't a jerk, or this shouldn't be happening. But I think that it's important for us to allow the heartbreaking grief to be there. And it's only a dominant culture that says it's not okay to feel these things that would continue to infuse in each of us this idea that we shouldn't be feeling these things, that it's not okay to be grieving your guinea pig a year later. And I really sincerely mean it when I say that downward pressure to get over things is so toxic. It's so profoundly toxic. And I think it's really helpful when we find ourselves policing ourselves and our own heartbreak, our own pain, our own grief, to recognize that the voice that's policing us may just be a conditioned voice. Because otherwise we could just perhaps allow the feeling to be there. So when we're feeling grief, one thing that I feel allows it to be there, or heartbreak, or the intensity, is letting ourselves not be good and strong and fine. I feel that, again, in a culture that resists pain, simultaneously, it can be said, resists pain and proliferates it, just grows it, multiplies it, and proliferates it. But really, on the deepest level, has a terror of death, an avoidance of death, an avoidance of pain, an avoidance of sadness, grief, anger, all of these, and again, a simultaneous fueling of and stimulation of these things as well. But yeah, it's a badge of honor in such a culture to be good, to be fine. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm strong. I've got this. And what I've started to recognize is that strong, fine, good, doesn't need anything is such a tremendous burden to carry. It's beautiful to know our true resilience. It's beautiful to believe that we will be okay. It's beautiful to find our backbone and find our strength. And if it stands in place of pain, if it stands in place of grief, if it doesn't allow us to feel, then how strong, how good, how fine is it really? Is it actually a fragile response to the inability to be with that intensity? And again, a lot makes that more difficult. If you are raising 6 children, then, your ability to take time and space to really feel your grief may feel completely inappropriate and unavailable, actually. So I want to name that and also say that this too, the lack of support, the lack of cultural community support is a symptom of this same sickness in culture that requires us to suck it up and push through and be good and be strong and be fine and not go there with the pain. And one of the greatest lessons that I received, maybe in my life actually, is one of my friends, Janine Yoder Kachuba, reached out to me when my dad was dying. So we had come home from a trip to Bali, and I got a call that my dad was nearing the end. We went to visit. I believe we came back to California because he kind of perked up while we were there. And then I got the call like, oh no, it's really time. And we said, okay, let's go. So we packed up and went, and Noah is my partner, was having a pretty major ear surgery. I think it was 5 days after, or a week after we were traveling to Canada to say goodbye to my dad. So there was a lot. It was this kind of perfect storm moment. I feel like there was something else happening in our lives at that time that I can't put my finger on or remember right now. But, basically we were going to say goodbye to my dad for good, and then come home and go into surgery. And so, I would be grieving and taking care of a 3-year-old by myself, which plenty of people all over the world do all the time. And it's a lot. It's a lot to do these things without support. So my friend Janine reached out to me and she was like, what do you need? And I was like, I'm good. And she was like, no, really, what do you need? And I was like, I think I've got it. I'm really organized. I'll do this. We're going to fly here. We're going to do this. We're going to da, 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 da. And she was like, babe, I'm going to stretch you and I'm going to ask you to just receive. And I'm telling you, it was so hard, and I get what a privileged position it is to be offered that support, that nourishment, that care. And I wish it for everyone. I really wish this for everyone, because my friends rallied and ended up feeding us every day for 2 weeks after we got home. Every day there was food delivered to the house. Our fridge was full of food that was lovingly ordered or cooked by our friends, and it made the biggest difference. Oh, they also did a childcare schedule for Raven. And so every afternoon, I think every weekday afternoon or a few weekday afternoons a week, someone would come over and watch my kid for 3 hours so I could work. It was life-saving. It allowed me to, some days I went downstairs to work with the intention of working, and I just laid on the floor and cried by myself. Some days I just sat in the bath and watched a movie while someone watched my kid, and it felt so indulgent. I felt like I should be working. But all that time to just be with myself and sometimes work too allowed me to walk through the journey of grief. And a question that I love to ask people when it's really hard for them to receive in that way is, what is the world you want to live in? Like, what's your vision for the world that you want to live in? And for me, the world that I want to live in is one where we help each other. We show up for each other. And so if that's the world that I want to live in, I have to be willing. I have to learn to be able, but I have to be willing to be on the receiving end of that. and not always be the good one and the fine one and the strong one, and sometimes be the one that falls into the web of support and allows myself to be held in the same way that at times and many times I'm holding the web. So receiving that trustable support that's offered, and even stretching in our willingness to ask for it, and not to have to be so good and strong and fine all the time. To that point, something that I find and that I found really helpful at times, and that has really served my client at times, is to find someone that you can agree to be annoying with. And what I mean by that is, so often when we are in a dance with heartbreak or a dance with grief, we're like, ugh, I'm so sick of myself. I'm like a broken record. It's just, I can't stop thinking about this. I can't stop talking about it. I can't stop crying about it. And we start to disconnect from our loved ones. We start to put on a fake happy face. We start to, I don't want to burden them. I've already talked to them about it. And then we start isolating. And I find it to be so powerful to find someone that you can make an agreement with, that you can just be annoying. And I love being this person for my friends. Like if a friend is going through a breakup or a passing of someone, or just some other experience in their life, a pregnancy after a series of miscarriages, even like something really beautiful, but that brings that ache too with it. I'll often volunteer myself to be a person like, listen, you can talk my ear off about this. You can talk about it a million times. You can, keep being in the same place with this. And I love you. I don't want you to, feel in pain in an ongoing way. And if you are, I'm here. I'm here for you. I'm here for it. So please, let yourself be annoying with me. And again, it's these places where sometimes we have to ask for that. Is there someone in your life that you can create that agreement with if you're going through something, and also be that person for them too? All right. So another thing that I find really supports the dance of heartbreak and grief, and how do we show up when we're experiencing that, is consciously choosing what balls to drop. Because we're going to drop the ball. We're not going to likely keep up with everything, keep up with the emails, keep up with the texts, keep up with the appointments, keep up with this, keep up with that. And we will start to either feel the tremendous pressure to keep juggling at our usual speed, or we will start dropping balls and getting really sloppy. And then there's the guilt and shame spiral and the whole thing. Consciously choose, if you are in a time of heartbreak, of intensity, of grief, if there's a lot going on in the world and you're feeling unstable, choosing in advance what balls, or at any time really, what balls are you choosing to drop? Like, okay, I'm just going to suck at email for a month, or I'm going to put an email autoresponder on that says, I am taking a break from email for 1 month. Text me if you have my number, or if it's urgent, reply with urgent if you actually plan to check your email. But choosing consciously what balls to drop. Maybe this is taking time off of social media, canceling meetings unless they're urgent, things like that. We get to choose. We get to choose if we are able to take the space to make that choice. It's a privilege to be able to take that space to make a choice. And if you have it, I definitely recommend using it, to take that space, make the choice in advance. Or if you're already in the process of dropping a lot of balls, like unconsciously or inadvertently, now is a great time to pause and just decide, what do I need to clear off? What do I need to say no to? And also focusing on the basics. When I've been in acute heartbreak and acute grief or acute overwhelm, writing down what my pillars of core nourishment are. And so it might be going to bed at 9 p.m., going on a walk once a day, eating 3 meals a day. Not more than kind of 5 things that are the really basic pillars of nourishment. Because often heartbreak, grief, overwhelm can come in waves and hit us when we least expect it. And it can be really disorienting. And I find that knowing what those pillars are, I would even write them down and stick it on a fridge, stick it on a cabinet, stick it in your wallet. And so that you can refer to it. If you're feeling lost, if you're feeling disoriented, okay, wait, what are my basics? Do I need one of these things right now? Have I been doing these things? Which one can I give myself in this moment? I talked about this earlier, the ways that we can say, I shouldn't feel X, or, that person was an asshole, so I shouldn't feel so upset, things like that. I think a piece that's so key here, and this has to do both with allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling and allowing it to be present in the way that it's present. If it's 6 months later, that we just refuse to play the heartbreak or grief Olympics. I shouldn't feel sad when so many have less than me. Or I shouldn't feel heartbroken over this because, this person lost a child, or whatever it might be. I think some things are more traumatic than other things. But I also believe that I don't know how a person registers their own pain and their own grief in their body, heart, and psyche. And I find that heartbreak and grief Olympics to be a complete bypass. It's like, I'm not allowed to feel this, or I'm only allowed to feel so much of this. And I just call bullshit on it. And I would say, if you are in grief, if you are in heartbreak and you see yourself playing a comparative grief game and doing some comparative heartbreak calculations, just stop. Just don't let yourself do it. I find it to be harmful to ourselves and to others. And allowing it to be there, yes, it doesn't mean that we have to take it into other people's spaces of grief when they're grieving. And unless that's part of what we're doing, which is not always true. Sometimes we're focusing on one grief or one trauma or one injustice. That is totally great. And there are also times and spaces where we all get to share. When that is the agreement. But making it so that we're not allowed to feel our heartbreak or grief because someone else's is bigger, someone else's is seemingly more important, or that we won't let them feel their heartbreak or grief because ours is more important, that's where I feel like things get pretty problematic. So there's a lot more nuance to that, but I would say that comparative heartbreak and grief is real toxic, actually. Another thing that I see often is people wanting to bypass their overwhelm or their grief or their heartbreak by kind of grasping for the silver lining, or assuming that there is a soul contract involved and therefore they should yield their pain to that soul contract. And I have a lot to say about this because I think that the notion of soul contracts has often been co-opted in many ways by New Age spirituality or the New Age movement. Not always, but at times, I think it's been co-opted to normalize abuse and to normalize harm done and to rationalize it. And I'm not here to say whether someone else had a soul contract. I'm not here to say whether someone predetermined or chose on a soul level their pain or their trauma. I think we each get to discern or choose what we believe for ourselves. I don't feel that I get to choose, believe, or have say-so around someone else and what their soul is choosing. I just don't feel that that is my place or frankly anyone's place. I also believe that we came here to be human. I mean, that's why we're here. And on the human plane, there are human contracts around love and safety and care and regard, respect. And so not allowing ourselves to feel pain over those broken contracts, over those deeply even natural but painful happenings in our lives, because, well, it was preordained or it was soul contracted. And so I should just bow to that and let go of my own personal pain. If you want to believe that, go for it. You know, again, it's not for me to say. And also, I would always ask folks, like, are you also allowed to feel your own pain? Are you also letting yourself feel what you genuinely feel? So I think the last thing that I want to say is there are so many different rituals to grieve, to honor endings and beginnings. Something I've been in the practice of is exploring what my traditional ancestral traditions are around rituals for death and endings and beginnings as well. And implementing some of those rituals and trying them out in my own life, in the endings and beginnings of my life, and in the times of overwhelm in my life. And, you know, in our modern lives, many of us have lost a real rooted practice of ritual as a way of honoring transitions, honoring seasons, honoring periods of change or profound change. We're always in moments of change, but periods of more significant or profound change. And so if it resonates with you, exploring ancestral ritual traditions around endings and beginnings can be really beautiful and powerful if you haven't already done that. But there are also so many ways, so many pathways. And ritual, I find, can be really bolstering to us. It doesn't end the heartbreak or grief necessarily, but it validates it, it honors it, it allows it space to be respected. So there's so much more that we could explore around this. I look forward to having conversations with other folks over time around grief and heartbreak and how do we show up in this world at this time and in our lives at this time and in our work at this time as well. And one invitation that I want to share with you is that I have a free workshop coming up. It's called Embody Your Leadership. And it's all about expanding your freedom to show up with vision and devotion. And for many of us, these are really intense times. And yet there is that calling to show up now, still, always, but certainly even inside this intensity. So you can sign up for the workshop. Again, it's for free, and it's at embodyyourleadership.com. And I deeply believe that we were made for these times and that it'll take each of our unique leadership to co-create the world that we dream of. So I hope that you'll join us, embodyyourleadership.com. And thank you so much for being here. Hey, wait, I forgot something. Art, beauty, pleasure, joy. We need it. We really need it. Drink it in, take it in, enjoy it. It is medicine, and let us not underestimate the need to take this beautiful, potent medicine. Art, beauty, pleasure, joy. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for being here, beloved. I want to extend my heartfelt invitation for you to join our podcast Inner Circle for free at devotionpodcast.com. You'll receive access to show notes and free bonuses, including my favorite guided meditation when you sign up. If you loved this episode, please share it, subscribe, and I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review. Our mixing and sound design is by Lou Janot, brand design by Neverland Studio, episode images by Liv Haddon, and our theme song is From the Ground Up by Ayla Nerio. Thank you all. And thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful, and I'll talk to you soon.
We were brought up in a race. From the clouds above we're raining. From the crowd up we were raising. From the ground up we were building. From the clouds above we're raining. From the crowd up we